gamers, Powered Heal here, and welcome to the Classic Plus Corner. This is a segment of the channel where we discuss all things related to WoW Classic Plus. This will be episode 23, and today we'll be talking about the Paladin and Shaman problem. At least that's what I name it. And basically this is referring to the idea that in Classic WoW, you can only play Paladin as Alliance, and you can only play Shaman as Horde. And then in the Burning Crusade, they basically changed this. So with the new races that came out, the Blood Elf could play Paladin, the Draenei could play Shaman, and it's a major change that they made, kind of like almost like a crossroads, really, that changed the game, I think, kind of going forward forever in a way, because it probably just removed the idea of ever having kind of faction-specific classes to be, after that. I think that Blizzard just made that decision, and they were like, okay, we're kind of never doing that again. But keep in mind, that's with the framing of moving towards retail in mind, right? Everything since the original Classic, even the Burning Crusade, in my opinion, has been kind of like a move towards retail. And that's not saying that the Burning Crusade is retail or super similar to retail, but it just explains, in my opinion, why you would never see another class that was faction locked like that again. But now we're kind of talking about Classic Plus, so things are a little bit different, right? Because the whole idea is to get back into that Classic frame of mind. And the question is the game better off having the faction lock in place or not, right? And I think at first glance, the answer is overwhelmingly people want it removed, right? They want to be able to play whatever class they want and whatever faction they want. I have a kind of intimate understanding of this because, in 2019 Classic WoW, I wanted to start out as a Paladin. But all my friends wanted to play Horde, so I basically ended up having to play Horde, and I couldn't play Paladin. I ended up, making a priest and having a lot of fun with that, so it kind of worked out, but still it was something that was kind of disappointing at the time and a bit frustrating. So I kind of sympathize with people, that in some cases it's not just a matter of like the aesthetic, right? Of oh man, I kind of want to play Paladin, but I'd rather play like a Horde-ish version. Because in some cases, it's like literally people are not being able to play with their friends or not being able to play the class they want. And usually that's not something that happens, right? Usually it's kind of like mostly an aesthetic thing or maybe just like a racial thing. You feel a little bit less power in some areas. Some things are a little bit more annoying, but you can always play with your friends. You can always play with the class you want. And that's not really the case here. So I understand the intuition to want to have the Paladin and Shaman available on both factions. If you look at the survey data, 71% of players want Paladin and Shaman on both factions. And to be honest, I think we very well could end up getting that, right? Because I think it's just the kind of direction that Blizzard's been moving recently. I don't think that they want to like block off things as like least amount of time as possible, right? They don't want to almost like arbitrarily, I don't think this is necessarily arbitrary, but they don't really want to like arbitrarily block off access to a given class or something like that. But what are the disadvantages of doing Paladin Shaman on both sides, right? Well, for me, we'll talk about original Classic here because this is our best frame of reference, and then we'll kind of talk about how it could apply in Classic Plus. So for me, the one thing that concerned me after the original 2019 Classic is kind of like the racial balance in the game. Now, I guess on the PvE server, this isn't quite as bad, although, to be honest, I still think it can be problematic. For a long time, retail, the Alliance has been kind of known as the lesser faction in a lot of cases, just because there's like less people that play it, and ultimately it's harder to find better players because when you have a faction that's just better racial-wise, right, what ends up happening is over time, more and more players are going to gravitate toward this faction. So not only are there less people on the Alliance, right, but which can just make the game more annoying to play in some cases, right, but also the quality of player tends to be worse, at least on retail. And the same thing could very easily happen with a game like WoW Classic. And let's take a look at the racial situation, right? So basically, a lot of people, I feel like, play Horde because of the racials. They like the PvP ratio, especially on a PvP server at least, right? That's why you always see on Horde servers the population balance typically favors Horde. Now, obviously you're going to have, back in 2019, there were some servers that probably the pop balance favored Alliance, but that was because the server situation was kind of split up. If you put all those players in a mega server, the pop balance would have favored Horde for sure. It's like very rare that you're ever locked out of making like alliance characters. I believe it was kind of even this way in Season of Discovery for the most part. I think it was way easier to make a Horde character, or sorry, an alliance character than a Horde character. So why is that the case, right? Well, because outside of the actual Paladins on Alliance and Shaman on Horde, the Horde just honestly tends to have better racials, in my opinion. And the thing is, there's not really a ton of super crazy PvE racials. I mean, humans do have the swords, right, and the maces, but a lot of people aren't really into PvE to like that insane degree. So a lot of players, like I said, that are playing on the PvP server, they are just going to choose Horde, and it's going to make the faction balancing kind of a nightmare. Now, Blizzard has forced faction balancing on the PvP server now. And I think this is something that's kind of likely to stay. So this is something that could be interesting because this could kind of solve the whole problem, right? It would give people, I don't want to say an incentive necessarily, but it would essentially force people to go Alliance on these servers, even if the racials are sort of subpar, right? Because honestly, I think that if you didn't have, like if you had Paladin being able to be played on the Horde, you would see an insane amount of faction balance on the PvP servers. It would probably be something like 75-25 if you did not have forced faction balance enabled. So, yeah, I think that if you're not going to do forced faction balance, again, you have to be really careful. And like I said, even though we have forced faction balance on the PvP servers, it's not going to be like that on the PvE servers. And if the balance is too skewed on PvE servers, then yeah, you can get a situation like in retail where, essentially Alliance becomes known as sort of like the noob faction, right? Where it's just harder to find quality players and quality groups. So I think you have to be really careful here. And I think that having a unique class is kind of like it's like a balancing lever that really can't be avoided, right? Like if you want to play Paladin or you want to play Shaman, you have to play that faction. And as long as one of those classes isn't like terrible, right, then you're kind of safe because inevitably you're going to probably trend towards 50-50 in some regard, right? Whereas the moment you allow the equal distribution of those those two classes, now we run into this problem of like, well, every faction can do what the other faction does, so now it's just purely about the racials, purely about the aesthetic. And I think that in the current state WoW Classic is in, the racials do tend to favor Horde just a bit too much. Like they're just really strong. Again, maybe if you're going for like pure PvE, the human racials are nice, right? But most players aren't playing like that degree for like pure PvE, especially because they're mostly competing against players within their own system, within their own guild and stuff like that. So a lot of players aren't super concerned about the fact that they're going to be competing with, a human who has plus swords or something like that. Not to mention Horde gets Wind Fury, right, which is another thing for like individual damage parses that kind of favors Horde. So when you combine all these things together, I think it makes it so that we would just see barely any alliance in a lot of cases if you removed the Paladin Shaman thing. Now, another thing you could do is you could rebalance the racials, right? So I think this is probably coming in WoW Classic, so I'm also not sure how big of a problem this whole thing is going to be in general, just because I could definitely see them doing a racial pass. Are the racials going to be completely equal? No, but I have a feeling that Alliance will, on the whole, get stronger racials than we see in WoW Classic. So this could kind of bail us out a little bit. The problem is, again, if the racials are just equal, now we're kind of down to aesthetic. But I think if we're just down to aesthetic, there's probably going to be enough players on both factions. And on the PvP servers, people will be more apt to swap factions, right? So it's not like people are going to have to play Horde or have to play Alliance on one of these servers. It could be interesting if they try and do the forced faction balance on a PvP server and they make, Paladin and Shaman playable by both races or both factions. And, you just have a ton of problems getting people on the server. Like, imagine if people don't do the typical thing where they kind of fall in line and just pick whatever faction allows them to get into the game faster, and you have a ton of people that are actually holding out to play Horde, because now there's no reason why they wouldn't play Horde, right? Because, they have the Paladin, and they have all the benefits of Horde, and they didn't change the ratio substantially. So imagine a situation like that, and the server basically is just, is getting like no pop, because nobody's wanting to roll on it, because, they can't create a Horde character, it's like locked or something like that. That would actually be an insane thing. I wonder how Blizzard would actually kind of confront that problem. You'd almost end up with the, the other server situation, I feel like, potentially, where you just had like a bunch of these smaller servers or whatever, and somebody down the line would get the short end of the stick somewhere, right? But yeah, it would be really interesting to see how they handle that. So I think it's very important that, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do the Paladin Shaman on different factions, you kind of rebalance the ratios a bit. You make it so that there's incentive to kind of go both ways, and it really is just kind of up to visual preference, or maybe not purely visual preference. Like, I'm fine with there being advantages and disadvantages, but they have to be a bit more proportional. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'm expecting that we get Paladin and Shaman for both. I think that, like I said, Blizzard, they're kind of over it. They're kind of over doing all the super unique stuff, and we are going to get a bit of homogenization in Classic Plus, which for the super hardcore crowd, like, loves the base Classic principles. I understand that, probably not looking forward to it, but I think they think it's just better for the game overall if people can play the class they want on the faction they want, and this isn't just another thing that's kind of dividing the player base in some way. And they honestly could be right, even though I'm a little bit nervous and sort of skeptical about some of the outcomes here, and about it causing some potential issues. I think that if you rebalance the racials, like you do the forced faction balance, things will probably work out okay in the end. So ultimately, I think I'm okay with Horde Paladins and Alliance Shamans, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys later. If you like this, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.